This podcast is brought to you by OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, the advocacy body for professional engineers and the engineering community in Ontario.
Today I'm speaking with Réjeanne Aimey, the President and Chair of the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. Réjeanne is a mechanical engineer with experience working in the automotive and nuclear industries in North America and is currently working in the consulting world. Réjeanne, we first met volunteering with OSPE as fellow board directors, and I know we're both passionate about creating a more diverse and inclusive engineering profession in Ontario. Before we talk about the work that we're doing in this space, that effectively you're doing in this space, how did you recognize that diversity and inclusion was an issue in engineering?
Hi, Jerome. Well, for me, it was quite clear from the very beginning. When I go back to my education, so I attended the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, great school. But one of the things I realized when I arrived is if you took a snapshot of the university at that point, and you looked at all 4 years of engineering, I was the only Black female in the entire engineering school at that time. And that was a very daunting experience for me, as I didn't quite expect that to be the case. And that's when I began to suspect that, the rest of engineering may have been like this as well. I think there was a part of me that felt that because London, Ontario was a small town, that perhaps maybe more of the diversity would surround the metropolitan areas, such as like Toronto and Montreal. And so I think that there was a little part of me that was hoping that that was the case. However, from my first internship in 2001 to when I actually got into the workforce full time, up until now, that has not really changed. So, it was quite clear to me, I would say around 2015, 2016, that there was definitely a problem in the engineering space. And around 2017 is when I really set out to try and figure out why that was and, what could be done to bring some more diversity into the profession.
That's an interesting fact that you brought up there at Western. I actually am a fellow graduate of Western University as well. I can remember back at my time there, a lot of, especially in mechanical engineering, mechanical was known as being very white and very male at the time. And women tended to be in more of the softer engineering fields, such as maybe civil and chemical engineering, but mostly it was dominated by white women at the time. Do you see that shifting or changing in connections with engineering graduates today, or your sense of what the engineering student body is currently, or do you see that we're still at the same stage it was 10, 15, 20 years ago?
So unfortunately, I think it's at the same state that it was 15, 20 years ago, and I'll tell you why. I have met in the time since I moved to the Toronto area, I have met a handful of Black engineering graduates from other schools. And it's interesting that whenever I have a conversation with them, it always comes out that they are the only one in their workplace. So even though you have a room, say, full of 10, 15, 20 Black engineering graduates, each one is saying that they are the only one in their workplace. So that sort of tells me, that things haven't changed. And it also tells me that it has nothing to do with, places like London, Ontario being less diverse. The point is that you have places like Toronto where you have the diversity within a population, but clearly that somehow isn't translating into the engineering profession. And around 2017 is when I really, started to try to figure out why for myself, because there was a genuine curiosity there. And I believe a part of me wanted to know what could I possibly do to help. So that really got me started on that journey.
Interesting. In the last year or so, we've seen a shift, as it were, in the kind of spotlight being Sean on racial injustices, especially in the United States, with all of the uprising in the summer. Black Lives Matter movements have gone from being a niche topic to having large swaths of the general public being on board with their message, and the anti-racism demonstrations being seen across the globe and being supported by demonstrations in all over Canada and Europe. Do you think that this particularly shines a light on the engineering profession going forward? Do you think that this could be a catalyst for more recognition, maybe a catalyst for change, and more understanding of what it is to be a minority and to grapple with white privilege in this day and age? Or do you think this is the time to wrangle with these issues?
Well, I think that we should certainly use the moment as it's happened last summer with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, and the consciousness that that's really brought to, I would say, general populations across the world, to our advantage, to use it as a time when we can, talk a lot more about this topic of diversity and inclusion and bring the awareness of the issues to the forefront. As we know, Jerome, it all depends on people. And when you're dealing with people, it really depends on what they want. The reality is, and not many people would like to acknowledge this, but the reality is that if you want to make a change, you're going to make a change. And what's been happening is, to me, quite clearly that the population is aware and has always been aware that there's been a problem. It is just that those who have been in let's say, positions of leadership within a lot of these companies, they have gotten there based on their own hard work, some of them based on nepotism. They haven't really done anything wrong. And so for them, as long as, their career trajectories are what they would expect them to be, it's hard to see how someone else is being disadvantaged for that. And to be quite frank, I don't think that they really care very much that someone else may be disadvantaged. And a lot of it is because those from underrepresented groups, which would include women, may not necessarily be in their networks. So what I'm trying to say is that they are very far removed from the experiences of people in underrepresented groups and of women. And so from that perspective, it's really very easy to see how, they are aware of issues, but not necessarily vested in resolving a lot of these issues, if that makes sense. So go ahead, Jerome.
Okay, that's interesting. So what do we say to these people that think that there is not a problem within engineering or any other professional vocation, that it's kind of hoopla and it'll die down and there's only a small subsect of people that think that there's a problem?
Well, I would say to them that this is the point where you get to educate yourself. And that's what makes this whole, Black Lives Matter movement and this new consciousness so important. Hey, this is a new public interest issue that everybody's talking about. Now is the time. If you don't understand, you can reach out to organizations like OSPE. You can ask for training. You can network with others and, just start asking those questions to really start to get an understanding of what are some of the problems and, how you can potentially help. I know there are a lot of people out there who are very close to, let's call them social justice type issues. And they would be very happy in order to, provide answers or to provide assistance wherever they can. So it really is just a matter of those people reaching out and, asking questions, sort of step outside of themselves a little bit and, be a little bit uncomfortable. We know it's not going to be easy, but, this is what we have to do if we want a much more inclusive and cohesive society.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. At OSPE, we're here for you, making sure government, media, and the public are listening to the voice of engineers. You can learn more at ospe.on.ca.
Exactly. In addition to serving on the OSPE's board of directors and now president, you were part of the group that started. You were actually on the founding member of amongst the founding members of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force back in 2018. OSPE members came together to discuss diversity, inclusion, and to create change. We knew that there was going to be barriers within engineering for underrepresented groups beyond women. What part of this work are you most proud of?
Well, quite frankly, I'm really proud of the fact that, the OSPE board around 2018 decided to include underrepresented groups in the existing women's committee and really have a diversity and inclusion task force, as you mentioned, that really looked out for the interests of all underrepresented groups, including women. And I say that because I believe it's since 1995 that, in general, women and the federal government has been looking for ways in order to make women included much more, into society. And when you look at what's happened over the last 20, 25 years, you can actually see that there has been inclusion of women, both in the private sector and in the public sector. And you've seen, the brilliant work that they've been able to do as a result. So I think it's really instrumental that OSPE made that decision, because what it does is it affords, the task force to use the lessons learned from a lot of what had been done with women in order to help, move the needle forward for underrepresented groups.
Interesting. Do you believe that women are a minority group? And what's your take on that?
Really interesting question. So I don't have the stats in front of me, but I've always heard that there's more women in the world than there are men. So from that perspective, I don't believe that women are an underrepresented group. I believe that they're a disadvantaged group for obvious reasons, because of, the way that society was set up, etc. But definitely they are not an underrepresented group.
Interesting. So what is the work that's left to do? How do we move forward changing the status quo?
Well, there's a lot of work that's left to do. And unfortunately or fortunately, it's not going to happen overnight. And so this is one of the reasons why, through the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, we have put together an EDI forum, which we usually have every fall. And, we have gotten a lot of sponsorship for that through the federal government and some of our other corporate partners, which is fantastic. And, we always get glowing reviews in order to start the conversation. And, we've had from our first year as a diversity and inclusion group, we've had approximately 800 members in person in attendance. So we've gotten a lot of support for that forum. And, we would like to continue building on what we've gotten through that medium. And so what we did this fall is, or I should say last fall, so for November of 2020, is we actually launched a campaign called Engineering for Change. Mm-hmm. And you can find the information for that under engineeringforchange.ca. And essentially it outlines a 4-point action plan that OSPE is going to be, working on or putting forward this year. And that 4-point action plan has 4 steps. So the first step is that we want to take concrete actions in reaffirming that diversity and inclusion remains part of our core values. So that would mean any of our operational work, any events that we put on, we're going to make sure that we have checked the box in terms of diversity and inclusion as best as we can. Second, we will be offering regular diversity and inclusion training to any members of the engineering community who seek it. So this is where those folks who aren't quite sure what's going on or want to learn more about what some of these potential issues are within diversity and inclusion, this is where they can reach out to us, and we would be more than happy to provide that information to them. The third step is that we will be launching a new featured diversity and inclusion champion award this year to honor OSPE members who are making real systemic change. So this is where we would invite, anyone out there who believes they are doing something significant to move the needle on diversity and inclusion to really reach out to us, reach out to our task force, make sure that we know about it so that, they could potentially be rewarded for their efforts. And I mean, we would love to hear about how they've accomplished, some of the solutions and the wins that we're confident that they're going to get. Right. And then finally, and this is the most important part, is that we are committing to convening a summit of engineering leaders to develop an industry-wide action plan. So we are recognizing that, as OSPE, as the Advocacy Association for the engineering profession in Ontario, that we alone will not be able to do this. So we are inviting all of our partners, all of our corporate sponsors, all of our members, anyone out there who basically hears about what we're doing. If you believe that you can help, if you believe that you can help us to formulate an appropriate action plan that is going to help us to move the needle on this as soon as possible and as effectively as possible, right, we would like to hear from them.
Great. Oh, absolutely. I want to touch on this past fall. Since the launch of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Conference, which has been a marquee event for OSPE every year, last fall it was a virtual conference, and it attracted around 1,500 engineers and professionals in STEM to create awareness for change. Can you tell me a little bit about the conferences before last fall and how the virtual conference actually turned out?
Well, so if I have my numbers correct, let's say maybe 10 years before 2017, every year, OSPE had what they call the Claudette McKay-Lassonde Forum, which was put on by the Women's Committee, we'll call them, every year. And it basically focused on a lot of the issues that were very important to women. So, for example, pay equity, right? And so they would invite a lot of speakers. And I would say on average, those forums probably had approximately 50 or less fewer people who would be in attendance. And they were all in-person events because that's, typically the type of event that OSPE put on. In 2017, so 3 years ago, that was when the decision was made to continue with the spirit of that forum, but to also include underrepresented groups. We wanted to broaden, how we were approaching this issue. And quite frankly, a lot of our partners, including the federal government, was very eager to hear about diversity when it includes all underrepresented groups. So our very first forum in 2017 had approximately 800, attendees in person in Ottawa at the Shaw Center, downtown Ottawa. Very well attended.
It's amazing. Isn't that pretty astounding? 800 people for the first, for the launch?
It is. And I mean, kudos to OSPE staff for, being able to get an event of that caliber off the ground. And, the kudos that it's even brought to our organization from our partners was really good because it aligned with what a lot of our corporate partners were looking to learn more about and really to get a lot of those conversations started. So I would say it's really from that very first EDI forum, let's call it, when we started to get a lot of traction on these types of issues, both inside and outside of the engineering profession. And so since then, every year we've added a few more members, but this last November, because of COVID-19, we were forced to have that conference virtually. And as you mentioned, we had approximately 1,500 engineering professionals. I believe there were around 2,800, people who registered. So we had quite a few people who were interested in this inside and outside of the profession. And I have to tell you, the number of people who have reached out to me since then, being so pleased that, we have, we're taking this so seriously, just tells me that everyone wants a sense of belonging. And that's what this gives them. And, I'm also, pleased to say that it's not just people from underrepresented groups that have
Right.
been attending this. It's, everyone. And I think, it's a very positive indication
That's
that,
important.
yeah, and that we can actually get the traction that we want off of doing forums like that.
Mm-hmm. You say traction. How do we keep the conversation going between conferences? What happens within the year? Christmas time, summertime. What should we be thinking about to keep the
Well,
conversation going?
yeah, definitely keeping the conversation going would be, for those who believe they have subject matter expertise in this area, I would invite them to reach out to, our diversity and inclusion task force. Maybe there's something that they can do to help us. OSPE is going to be working on this action plan. So again, if you're somebody that feels you have, the expertise or some really good ideas of how we can do this, please don't hesitate to reach out. But most importantly, as for right now, at engineeringforchange.ca, we have launched this campaign. And on that website, there is the ability to tweet. So there's a very generic tweet. I believe we ask for your name, for your postal code and your email. So it's not too intrusive. Mm-hmm. And, if you have a Twitter account, we are asking you to simply just go hit that button. And we will tweet for you that you are in fact supporting that campaign. So that's something that, we are inviting everyone to do. And this is how we could continue to keep the conversation going.
Great. That's great advice. If you can offer one more piece of advice, one thing that you would say to an individual engineer or either someone attempting to be an ally or attempting to combat issues that they're facing personally in the profession, what would you say and what would you suggest?
I would definitely advise not to go it alone. So I would invite them to reach out, and not necessarily to OSPE, but I would invite them to form a group within their own social circles to really discuss what the issues affecting them are. Because this diversity and inclusion problem, needs to be approached from a very holistic point of view. And sometimes you need to ensure that you understand and realize the full ramifications of the situation that you're in, and to ensure that you may not necessarily be overreacting with regard to whatever you think the general situation might be. I think it's really easy because of how sensitive we are as human beings, and how we do a lot of things based off of emotion, where some things can be misconstrued. And so instead of labeling something systemic racism, or even beginning to utter those words, I really, really suggest that you talk to at least 3 other people about what you're going through, and get some good advice as to how you should potentially proceed.
Great. Thank you so much for giving great advice today, Réjeanne, and taking the time out of your busy schedule.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, Jerome.
From all of us at OSPE, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, thanks for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.